Yeah, but that would burn my eyes. But look, I can get you. I do have time. That's a laptop. This phone does not last 2 hours on charge from 90% to like 20%. I'm glad I'm going home to that. And it means that and like really striking up. You're getting it early. I'm getting it on November 1st. Go back around and they said that. No. I'm not going to get my phone. You know what? I have a new phone. I don't think she's going to get it. She got this one, and I don't want her to realise that I got this. That's why she got my glasses, because those were not good enough. I don't care. They're not bad. I can see the white card. This is good for you because you just miss
You're going to need to shit later.
You are?
You're going to need to shit later. It's really bad.
Good. As long as I don't do it like in the next 10 minutes, we should be alright, you know, otherwise that could get messy. Okay, so first topic proper today for MS-100, power and ideology in the mass media. Mass media is a specific term which applies to a specific era of media. And one of the things we need to get clear is that mass media does still exist, but it exists in conjunction with different form of media, which I will address next week. Before I go any further, I've had about a dozen people email me, ask me to look at drafts of assignments for next week. So far, so good. Actually, people's work is really impressive. There's been some really, really good examples. There's been at least like 4 or 5 people who have emailed me stuff where instantly I'm thinking, yeah, I'm going to give that first next week. I'll sit down and mark it. Definitely, that's going to be like 75. That's really, really pleasing. On the other hand, because I have access to the statistical tracking on Canvas, at the same time, I also know that there's about 50% people haven't read the actual chapter yet because they haven't downloaded it. That's really bad because, as I said in week 2, you should start every assignment 4 weeks before the due in date. Now, it's impossible to do with this second assignment because you literally had only just enrolled. But I did then also say that, you know, your reading for week 2 was that assignment as well. So that's not so good. But it is what it is. And, you know, people live and die by the decisions they make, and you're trying to stop them. You know, if you wanted to jump off a cliff, I'd push you. You know, I'd help you with that decision. I'd enable you to do something really stupid with your life. And I'm enabling you to do something stupid with your life here as well. If you don't want to do it, you don't. More importantly than that, we have tomorrow seminars for MS-100, and they will all be tailored to the assignment that is due on Wednesday. For those of you who've already completed it, and to my knowledge that's only a few people, and I've given them feedback saying, don't touch this, this is awesome, still come. Because you can still learn something about what you're doing, and you might just want to make the odd amendment here or there. To the rest of you, it seems like it's going to be very important, especially if you haven't read the first instance of it yet. But in order to be prepared, I I would really recommend that you download that this evening, go straight after this lecture, and even if you don't make any notes, read through so you know what the hell this is about. If you're in the 3 till 4 session with me tomorrow, obviously the person who devised this will be telling you all about it, so that's probably the one you want to be in. So good luck to the rest of them. So I will also be recording the 3 till 4 session as well. So even if you go to another seminar, you can always check back to have a look to see what I've got to say about it as well, given that I'm the person who's going to be marking predominantly all of this work. And Chris and Evelyn will mark some, but it's really my call. And I go through theirs and change the marks if that is necessary anyway. So kind of my call on this at the end of the day. Does anyone have any questions before I go into this today? Because obviously I won't see everyone tomorrow, and some people, which I kind of found out today, some people are kind of nervous about coming to see me, and like they go, oh my god, he's so frightening. So does anyone have any questions before I start?
I need to how to hand it in.
How to hand it in?
Yeah.
Fuck, I didn't think of that. Oh motherfucker! Before we even do that, and this will tell you how to hand it in, can you all go onto Canvas, please, and fill in the module feedback survey, because it now works. I know some of you have already done it. It's about 18 people have already done it. So here there's now people like, hey, bitch, I already did that. And I'm like, yeah, you can go onto the MS-100 bit. But if you have already done it, thank you very much. But if you haven't, knock yourself out. So you go onto Canvas, dashboard, and there's a tile there that says My Surveys. Apparently it's working now. And then I will address Lisa's question on how to hand it in, which is really, really fundamental and important. Still not working? How guys, I got some and not others. Oh! Apparently there's been an email sent with a link on it. Alright, scrub what I said. The Canvas link still isn't working. Apparently you've got an email. That email didn't come from me. It should have come from me. I was intending to send it at 12 o'clock today, but I forgot. My bad. But apparently you've already. Should only take a couple of minutes, well, less than that, it's only like 4 questions, I think. And then you can leave a nasty comment.
Is it?
Next week I have to go through feedback with you.
Unless you're unless you can
Leighton sucks balls, that's going to be an interesting one.
but then it comes up
Leighton's the biggest fucking jerk I've ever met in my
so
life.
like if you
I already knew Tuluga's put
then
that
you
down.
can get
Did you do your thing?
What?
The thing?
What thing? Yeah.
You did.
Yeah.
then you get anonymous.
If I didn't, that would be very stupid of me. But if you just go,
What?
I need to like,
Well, we'll just leave that in there, right? You walk right into that.
I have this right now because it's far too late when you write your
People
notes,
looking at email accounts now.
you
Fuck,
write
I
down
got an email account? Holy shit, what is all this stuff? There's a student union election today.
notes to myself at somebody show.
Did anyone stand as the course rep? I mean, you should put your hand up if you did. I mean, obviously you stood for election at this point. Did anyone? That could be bad. It might be that they have to select someone now. They probably ask me, because I teach you guys, and like Joanna and Elena, and they'll come up with something sensible, and I'll just cast my mind around. Who is the biggest mentalist in this module? I want that person to be the student rep. I want the person who looks like they eat wood chippings to be the student rep. That's the person I think will get it done. I want the person who's got jars of their own human waste in their room to be the student rep. That's the person that I trust. And you know it. I'm not looking at anyone in particular, but look at my name. Once again, I want to reiterate, this has been Just in your emails, so do it after. Okay, wasting time now. It's all my own fault, I know, but if you haven't found it, have a look through your emails after. There is a link. That link should work for the other two modules as well, I would hope. It should take you through to the others as well. It is an important thing. I genuinely will bring the report next week and put it up. It's completely anonymised. And then I will, I'll, if you've got comments and things that you want doing, I will do them. I will show you how I've done them this week. So it is a useful thing to do, definitely. This is probably a good opportunity to tell you about a couple of things. One, recordings of lectures are in this tab here, Panopto Video. So I have let me phrase this properly. There is a link to my YouTube channel somewhere. Where can you find that link? In the module handbook. See how this theme keeps on being developed, people, in the module handbook. But I've also, the reason why I'm using Panopto for this, I wouldn't usually, but it helpfully automatically creates subtitles. So if there's anyone who needs subtitles to watch videos back, Panopto's your place. YouTube's system of doing that takes ages and is dreadful and doesn't really work well with somebody with a Swansea accent, unfortunately. Although it does really well with the swear words, it gets them spot on. It's a universal language somewhere. So if you need that option, Panopto's there. In order to submit your assignments, this tab here, assignment, click on there. I hope this works. Assignment 2, you click on this. You can download the submission cover sheet here. Okay, so download that document, save it on your computer, because it's the same for every assignment you ever submit. What people usually do is copy and paste their assignment into that document underneath the cover sheet, save it. This is in handbooks and so on, but it's probably never been explained. There is a format for what you save your work as. It goes like this: student number, module, assignment number. So for this forthcoming one, you will submit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, MS-100 2. And that's it. You don't need to call it anything else. Please don't call it summary. Fuck you and your summary. The reason being, it really pisses off lecturers if you don't do it in that way. And I'll tell you exactly why. University systems are terrible. Once you've submitted and we've marked them, we have to resubmit your grades on an Excel spreadsheet, which means you have to go back through all the submissions. When they say summary, I don't know who that is. I don't know what your student number is. And then I have to go through it, I have to read, I have to see where your student number is, and I feel really angry afterwards, because you've made me do at least 10 seconds extra work. But that builds up over a module of like 100 people. So please, stick to the format. Student number, module, number of assignment. So in this case, your student number, MS-100 2. When you submit in December, student number, MS-100 3. That's how it works. Okay? Please do a solid and stick to that. Don't use the title of the module, don't use the title of the assignment, anything like, just stick to that very simple system. Okay? Yeah, so you download the submission cover sheet here. Second important point is this. Please, nowhere in your submission should your name appear anywhere. If you're one of these people who's very, very conscientious and has headers to your Word documents and has your name and student number, take that name out. Don't put your name anywhere on the cover sheet, just student number. That's all. Technically speaking, we are not supposed to mark any assignment that has been submitted with a name because you have de-anonymized your work. And if you read the submission guidelines, it means your work is not valid to be marked. Very simple, just keep your name out of it, okay? This is the first year, I wouldn't not mark it, but I would tell you not to do it again. So please just don't do it in the first instance. So, there's a whole bunch of other stuff here about which you can read through at your own time. They can't process my request because I'm not a student, right? So, because I don't exist as a student. But there is a drop-down box here, just with a little upload on it. It knows who you are because you're logged in as you. You just hit upload, a little dialog box comes up, you select the file that you're going to submit, upload it, press OK, that's it. It is done, finished. So that's the process that you go through. Please, again, use the cover sheet because, again, technically speaking, we are not supposed to mark anything that doesn't come in with the cover sheet. This is a legal requirement because the cover sheet outlines exactly what the legal requirements are for an assessment, especially plagiarism. We have had in the past people who've committed plagiarism, we've gone to chuck them out of university because they're cheats, but because they didn't put a cover sheet on, technically they never signed anything that said, I'm not going to plagiarise. That leaves the university in a difficult position, so now we just assign 0. If you don't put in a cover sheet, we can't mark it legally. So, always submit the cover sheet with your work. Point number 2, only submit in Microsoft Word docx format. Do not submit as a PDF. Do not submit if you've got a Mac. Don't submit as a Pages document. The Pages document is way more problematic. PDFs we can open, but the system does weird things with formatting and it's kind of strange. It kind of comes up as an image, which means we can't make comments on your paper. Pages we can't open at all. Unless we have a Mac and we download it. I don't own the Mac, right? I'm Paul. I don't own a fucking Mac, alright? So, Pages I just don't, I'm not dumb, I can convert it into a Word document, I know how to do it. But again, it's a really time-consuming process for me to do and it really pisses me off. So please, if you have not installed Microsoft Office onto your Macs, remember you can do that for free. Search Swansea University Microsoft Office, you have a free download. Is there anything else that I need to put here? Last point, which is really important, and this is horrible. In a couple of weeks' time, I don't think it'll be next week, it'll probably be the week after the study week. There'll be some people coming to talk to you about the Media Society, which has just restarted with a new committee. And they'll be coming down asking you, do people want to be on the committee, and do you want to be members, etc. Right? It'll be very exciting, and we're all going to be excited about it. Somebody who's part of the Media Society now, last year, made this mistake, and it was heartbreaking. Because when I saw their actual work, it was nearly an 80. They submitted a draft instead of submitting their final copy. This was for an essay rather than a summary. But the draft was only about 300 words long. So I had to mark 300 words instead of 2,000. Got like 30. What else could I give it? I couldn't give it any more than that. She'd done the work and it was brilliant. The draft was actually really good, weirdly. As an introduction to an essay, I was like, damn, that is on point. And there was no remainder of the essay at all. Make sure what you submit is the final copy. Be very, very careful. Every year this happens, somebody puts in something which is not the final copy. Literally, when the deadline has passed, there's nothing we can do about it. If you think you've done it and there's a bit of time before the deadline, you can always email me. I can get the assessment office to remove your submitted work and you can resubmit it. But if, like, you submit it, because you've got to submit at 2 o'clock, right? So if you're submitting at 10 to 2, and then at like 5 past 2, you realise, oh shit, I put the wrong thing in, there is nothing I can do at that point. It's got the windows closed. So please make sure you put the right copy in. And you may think, I am not an idiot. Of course I'm going to. You'd be surprised, because the person I'm thinking about is also not an idiot. It's just an honest mistake, and it can happen. Be very, very careful what you do with drafts, okay? Any questions about this process? No? Right, so tomorrow we will go through the assessments with you in seminars and everyone will be happy. I've wasted 20 minutes of this lecture, which is fine, because do you know what? This week on Monday, for the first time, took into week 4, I actually finished the lecture on time on Monday. And if you go and watch the recording on YouTube, I'm literally, the last 2 minutes of that recording is me going, yeah, bitch, yeah, in your face, I did fucking do it in time, fuck you and fuck it. And that's basically the last 2 minutes, it's great. So, a lot of you will have studied this topic before, power and ideology in the mass media. If you've studied media studies, I think some of this will be familiar to you. If you studied sociology, this will be familiar to you. Communication studies, I think this will be familiar to you. But I'm going to do it anyway because you need to know it. So, mass media, very important term. In outline, what I'm going to talk about today is Marx and Marxism, concept of surplus labour and the media, which is something which I don't believe courses prior to degree level cover, the notion of surplus labour in the media. Marx's view of ideology, how we do an ideological critique, and then in the second half of this lecture what I'm going to talk about is a specific example of the political economy of the media from the mass media age. I'm going to focus on the development of the dominant paradigm of media funding in the 20th century and how it illustrates some of these ideas from the first part of the lecture. This is who? This is Marx. Can anyone tell me anything about Karl Marx before I begin? Who was Karl Marx?
A socialist.
Socialist? I think that's a fair comment. The father of socialism would be a good way of putting it. Karl Marx, a German. Does anyone know what field of academia Marx was engaged in?
Sociology.
No. But I can see why you might think that. Marx really started sociology, but because he started, he couldn't have been in it. Everyone that came after him was a sociologist. So he's the father of sociology in a very real sense. Marx was an economist. Marx was not anything to do with political theory. He wasn't, I mean, technically you could say he was a political philosopher, but actually his background was as an economist. His masterful works, Das Kapital in particular, they are economics books. They're not political philosophy books. His work has been interpreted as a mode of political philosophy. And you could argue that something like the Communist Manifesto that he wrote with Friedrich Engels is a piece of philosophy and indeed a piece of sociology as well. But that was really a subsidiary work compared to his other works. He considered himself, and should be considered, an economist. Marx's ideas about economics are extremely important in the study of virtually every subject in which economics is a part, including media studies, where it's fundamental to understanding how the mass media in particular operates. If you don't have an understanding of Marx, fields like PR and journalism will make no sense. Because to understand how those fields operate, you have to have an understanding of political economy, therefore you have to have an understanding of Marx's original formulations of what political economy is. And within that, we always talk about ideological critique. because an economic critique is about understanding the ideologies which are perpetrated within a particular field. Don't worry if you're getting confused. This will all become clear. That's my job. Is to take away those clouds of confusion and make it clear. Doing this shit for a long time. Don't worry, relax. I know what I'm talking about. Marx, Engels. I only show the picture because Engels' goatee is bitching. Look, people do not have that anymore. That is quality. He's putting gel in there. That is a classy piece of facial hair. Marx and Engels are often talked about together, roughly the same age as one another. I'm going to throw it out there. Does anyone know anything about Friedrich Engels? No? Great. One of the problems with academics, even back in Marx's time, is that a lot of them are terrible writers. And Marx is no exception to this. His major work, Das Kapital, is like that. It's thick. I could bring it in and start slapping people around with it and do some damage. I would not recommend at this stage of your academic careers that you read it either, because it's terribly written. Marx is an awful, awful writer. Very interesting ideas, terrible at putting them down on paper. Engels, really good writer. Fantastic. You could craft something with writing. Marx and Engels worked together, but Engels was the writer, Marx was the ideas guy. More interestingly, Engels was a factory owner. And this is really important when you understand Marxism and Marxist economic theory. Because Engels was kind of having a go at himself, weirdly. And Engels owned factories in Manchester. One thing that is often overlooked about Marx and Engels is that, these Germans coming up with all their ideas. We're British, we don't listen to Germans. Wrong, bitches! They were both technically British. Engels lived and worked and owned factories in Manchester. Marx spent most of his life in London and is buried in Highgate Cemetery, where you can go to. I don't know if you can actually visit his grave anymore, because certainly in the 60s, a lot of people, well, a lot of children were conceived on that grave. So I don't think they let people go near it anymore. And you often get dickheads trying to vandalise it and things like that as well. So I think there's a way to stop people doing it, but it's in the large cemetery in North London, Highgate. So, the original theory, Marx's original theory. This is the formulation that we usually understand. When somebody uses the word Marxism, this is usually what comes to mind. The aim of Marxism is to bring about a classless society based on the common ownership of the means of production, distribution and exchange in a society. Important words to pick out here. First of all, classless. This is not a reference to me after 10 pints, although it would be apt. Classless here refers to how Marx sees economic class as being absolutely fundamental to understand the workings of society. So in his theory, he proposes that there are distinct economic classes of people in a society. In effect, he argues that there are two. What his theory is about is how that class divide will collapse. Now, interestingly, the Communist Manifesto argues that there should be a revolution to do this, but his other work doesn't do that. Works like Das Kapital argue that actually the collapse will happen on its own. There are certain contradictions in capitalism which means that over time you will have fewer and fewer of the economic class which owns everything as you have each crisis of capitalism, until at the point when that becomes so small that they'll just vanish anyway and everything will be owned by the people. This is a historical view of how society changes. Probably been fairly certain proven not to be true since the time Marx was writing, but there is a very important idea there. So classless is a really important word. Marx sees society as consisting of different economic classes of people. Common ownership, therefore, means that one class will own things, not one class that owns and another class that doesn't own. Common ownership means that we all will own everything. Means of production, how things are made in society. And you know, think, okay, so what's that got to do with media? Well, it's made. Media is produced. We have a mass media that produces media for the masses. So media is a form of production. Distribution, how it's kind of self-explanatory, right, how it's distributed. And exchange, how things are exchanged within a society. What he's referring to there is the exchange of capital. Exchange of money for goods and services. So, common ownership of the means of production, the means of distribution, and the means of exchange, the means of actually paying for things. So that's the classic formalisation of Marxism. Now, when we think of means of production, we usually think of stuff like this. The means of production in a society is usually focused upon making physical stuff. In this instance, cars. Who makes cars?
Machine.
Hmm?
Machine.
Who owns the machine that makes the cars?
Human.
What? These are really broad answers. I'll come back to that.
Car company.
A car company. Give me an example of a car company, somebody.
Ford.
Ford. Ford. The original sons of bitches. Ford. Model T Ford 1905.
Our green.
Hmm?
Our green.
What do you mean?
Green.
Yeah, well, yeah. Henry Ford. Detroit, Michigan, 1905. Starts the production of the Model T Ford car, the first mass-produced automobile. Establishing the principle of a production line where identical goods are built at a very fast pace using automation in order to reduce costs. This is a fundamental principle of production in the 20th century. You produce the same thing over and over and over again so that everyone owns the same thing. You charge a cost to that end item. So let's argue in 1905, the Model T Ford cost $100. I'm picking that out of the air, by the way. I can't remember exactly how much it did cost. I'm just going to say argue it's almost certainly less than $100. How much do you think the Model T Ford would have cost Henry Ford to build in mass? If he's charging $100 for it. 20 probably. That would be a good thing. 1 to 5 ratio is usually a good rule of thumb for these things. That means when Ford started rolling out thousands of these, making 80% profit on every car he sold, what happened to Henry Ford?
Got rich.
He got rich as a bitch. He was fucking rolling in money. Henry Ford became so rich, he could do anything he wanted to. What do you think he did? He built more factories. He got richer and richer and richer till that son of a bitch died and went to hell to burn. Because how much do you think the workers on the line were making? No such thing existed in 1905. No such thing as the minimum wage. Making nothing, virtually. Ford established a principle of the production which became the dominant principle of production in the 20th century and still is today. You produce something using automation as cheaply as possible, using as little labour as possible, because that's a cost that you can avoid, and charge as much as you can for it. You might think, okay, Leighton, this is really interesting, but I did not sign up for a degree in fucking car studies. What has this got to do with media? Well, let me tell you. Companies looked at this and thought, son of a bitch, he has cracked it. The record industry is based on this principle. How did the record industry develop? They established means of production of making recordings as cheaply as possible, mass producing the same stuff for everyone. Originally on vinyl, but then in other formats too. And you sell people the same shit. Everyone listens to the same stuff. It's even easier in the digital age. Just pay a subscription to Spotify now, although that has disrupted the record industry in a big way because they can't produce anymore because everyone's got different means of doing it. The cinema industry, the same thing. Standardise the means of production so you can make and distribute film as cheaply as possible. It means you can open more cinemas, you can sell to more people, more profit, bigger industry. Construction of televisions, same principle. But most importantly in terms of the mass media for our purposes, the newspaper industry. You produce and roll off millions of newspapers at virtually zero cost using machinery. So you have a fixed cost for machinery, but after a few weeks, that fixed cost is paid. Because you're now distributing hundreds of thousands of the same thing, no variations, over and over, and you can start to charge a very low cost for that. All of a sudden, you're a massive readership. That readership in itself is valuable, as you will find out later on in this lecture. So the means of production is extremely important in terms of media. Who controls the means of production of media controls what media is produced. You might think, are there contemporary examples of that? Oh yeah, they are. Netflix controls what you see on Netflix. Someone say, of course they do. Yeah, yeah they do. Netflix produces what Netflix wants to produce. Netflix wants to produce a certain kind of audience. You might think, wait, where are you going with this, man? Because Netflix don't do adverts. Oh yeah, they do. But they do it in a different way. They just bundle up all of you guys and sell you to online advertisers who then pepper you with adverts in your email and when you're browsing the web and on your social media accounts. But this is how Netflix works. They're still using the same kind of model. Digital has changed the means of production somewhat. It's not like Netflix mass produces Orange is the New Black. There's only one copy. Everyone accesses the same one in the bucket. But at the same time, they're still mass producing a different kind of way. So, means of production for Marx, extremely important. His focus being on who owns that means of production, widely owned. The aim of Marxism is to bring about class society based on the common ownership of means of production. Marx's argument is that means of production in a society should be owned by everyone. Because when it's in the hands of the few, it means that those few people hold inordinate amounts of power in society. You might think, well, why do they do that? Well, because those bitches are rich. Ford, incredibly wealthy. That gave him inordinate amounts of political power in American society at the early part of the 20th century. And when I tell you other things about Henry Ford, like he was a fucking massive anti-Semite, a huge racist, and then you think, oh wow, well that guy shouldn't have any political influence. But he did. Because he had so much wealth. And so much control over a key industry in American society. So much control over who he employed and what he used that money for. This, my friends, is the political economy approach. Politics and economics come together so you understand. Economic wealth, in this case, leads to particular political ideals, and they get legitimized in society on the basis of the wealth of the person that has them. Therefore, means of production really important. This is why Marx thought having a few people in control of the means of production is a really bad idea for a democratic society. Because those people have inordinate amounts of power. And if they do, it means democracies aren't equal. Basically, what Marx charted was this. He looked at like early 18th century. Now, if I use the term 18th century, how do we... Give me a date in the 18th century.
1700.
Very good. Who said that? Excellent, thank you. 17 something something. Marx looked at how industry worked in the 1700s. Something happened in the 1700s, and we have a term for this which is very common, to change the way these things did. It's a two-word phrase. Can anyone tell me what it is?
It's the Industrial Revolution.
It certainly is, the Industrial Revolution. Marx looked at conditions pre-Industrial Revolution and post-Industrial Revolution to come up with a very important concept which underpins how the media works. Cottage industries in the 17th century, in the 1700s I should say, tripping up on my own fucking nonsense now. You worked, you produced, you sold. So you were intricately linked to the products of your labour. How much effort you put into something, you had a certain amount of product at the end of it. And you sold that product on the basis of what you made. So you, your labour, and the efforts of your labour were linked together very clearly. In the Industrial Revolution, we see a separation of those elements. In the 19th century textile mill, these people here, they worked, they produced way more than you would in a cottage industry, but you had no say over that final product. The product was owned by the person you worked for, and they realised the profit at the end of it, not you. You are paid a fixed wage for your efforts. So the bond between what you do as a person and what you are rewarded for is effectively broken. Now, in economic theory, what's happening here is something called surplus value. For example, if you were just working for yourself, you might have to make 10 t-shirts in order to make enough money to live for that day. Get yourself food, get yourself water, pay for your PlayStation account, whatever it is that you need to live, right? The factory owner probably doesn't even give you the 10. Gives you a fixed wage based on your efforts. Let's say you make the 10 and then make 100 more. All that 100 more is pure profit for the owner of that factory. That is called surplus value. Capitalism ostensibly works by creating surplus value. You find a way to make something and sell it for more than it costs to make. And if you can do that, you realise a profit. You get rich. But you don't just get rich, you reinvest those profits usually in other facilities to make more. And that's how you become big as a company. It's eventually how you become the biggest company around. It's eventually how things go your way. It's a very simple model, but it's an absolutely true model of how capital accumulation works. You might think, Ben, you're off the point, man. Well, media. Well, a lot of you want to be journalists. You'll work for a newspaper, maybe. A lot of you will work freelance, which means you're back in the piecemeal industry shit, basically. You're back in the cottage industry trying to do that. But if you don't do that, and you work for a newspaper, then the newspaper owner will pay you for your day's labour, and the rest of the people who work there. And then will sell the newspaper, but also sell advertising within that newspaper, which will realise a day's cost. And it will be over what they are paying you. And that will be their surplus value. Actually, one of the problems with the newspaper industry is because advertising revenues completely collapsed in the newspaper industry since the internet came along. None of them make a surplus profit anymore. There is no surplus value in journalism anymore, which is why journalism has become a really, really flawed area to actually work in. But the principles of surplus value certainly still work in media as well. So, this is why we're interested in these things, because surplus labour produces surplus value. The exploitation of labour in that way produces it. And we can think about these principles in terms of not just working in the media, but actually being a consumer of the media as well. So in 1976, Dallas Smythe came up with a concept called the audience commodity. What Smythe was interested in is, what do we do as an audience? Not how an audience is made, not what is an audience, not who's part of an audience, but what does an audience do? And for Smythe, as an audience, we work. We are doing unpaid labour for the media company that is producing the media that we are watching or consuming at that point in time. We are putting effort in. Our watching, reading and listening is a form of labour that is sold to advertisers for profit. Let me give you an example that's rooted in the time that Smythe was writing. So 1976, it's bonkers to think about now, but the top television programmes weekly in the UK in 1976 would regularly attract audiences of in advance of 20 million people. Now, you might have one or two programmes a year that do those kind of numbers, usually a big football match or the Queen game. But you won't get, EastEnders gets like 2 million maybe. Like, who is sad enough? Where did they find 2 million people gullible enough to watch that shit? I don't know, but there you go. Back in the 70s, programmes like Coronation Street regularly 20 million. Then there's reasons for that as well. There was only 3 television channels in the 1970s, so you didn't have a huge amount of choice. And, I mean, the 70s was proper grim. I was born in the 70s, I don't remember it because I wasn't very old in the 70s, but it was shit. There's nothing else to do, basically, except to watch TV in the night, so it tended to get big audiences. What Smythe was interested in is what happens to that 20 million people. That 20 million people gets packaged up and sold. So ITV in the 70s would say, right, 20 million captive audience for this programme. We've got an advertising break in the middle. We're going to sell that audience to these advertisers. So we're going to say to people who advertise on television, here's 20 million of these gullible fucks. We know they're gullible because they're watching this shit. They basically watch anything. We're going to charge you this amount to access these people. In that process, everyone who is watching the programme has been transformed into a labourer. You are doing work for the company to realise the profit of your labour. Just as if you worked in a factory, you are working in a particular way so the factory owner can realise a profit from your surplus labour. Here, your surplus labour of consuming media becomes a way that the media company can profit from you. We call this the audience commodity. So this principle of surplus labour is extremely important. As I will argue next week, this is now the dominant model of media economics today. But it's far, far further along than Dallas Smythe ever thought of. In fact, it's bonkers compared to what Dallas Smythe ever thought of. Basically, we create surplus value for media organisations. Our consumption of media itself is a process of making surplus value. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with, well, those of you who studied this before, are familiar with this. I'm going to turn this really clear here. This is a theory. This is not society. This is a theory proposed by Karl Marx about how some elements of society function. This is not society. If anyone writes an essay ever again to me that says, Marx said that society was made of a base and superstructure, I'm going to fucking scream. I'm going to jump out the window. Do you want suicide on your hands? Because that's what's going to happen. Because that, Marx said no such thing. Marx proposes a theory to explain the economic relationships between different classes in society. Boom, I just given you a 75 plus sentence. He did not make a theory. Marx said society is like this. He made no such claim ever. I'd love to be somebody to actually reference that properly so I can see where he said it, because guess what? It doesn't exist. Because I've actually read this motherfucker. So it doesn't, he knows. Marx proposed this model to explain how ownership of the means of production led to political and social influence within society. For Marx, there are two elements in society, the base and the superstructure. At the base, this is the economic structure of society, how things are produced and sold. In that, you do have the means of production, i.e. factories, craft, these kind of things, but also relations of production. Who owns these things? The difference between what Marx called the proletariat, those who work, those who exchange their labour for wages, and can anyone tell me the it's up on the screen, the bourgeoisie, those who own the means of production. The superstructure is everything that does not have to do with those relations of production at the base. Everything non-economic. Education, superstructural. Media, superstructural. Religion, superstructural. Education, superstructural. Family, superstructural. Politics, superstructural. Law, superstructural. I could go on and on and on. I think you get the point. Everything not to do with the economic relations in society is part of the superstructure. What we would argue perhaps is called culture, but which Marx said very importantly was the site of ideology. Now, for Marx, the economic base of society, who owns things, shapes ideology in society. The economic base shapes society. If you understand nothing else, perfect, because you've got it. Who owns stuff shapes the rest of culture in a society. And, critically, culture, superstructure, maintains the economic base. This is the bit that people often don't get. What happens culturally legitimizes what happens at the base. So put very simply, if we have a certain set of economic relations at the base of society, a certain group of people own everything and have a certain set of political ideas, they will shape culture to legitimize the fact that they run and control everything. That is Marxist theory in less than 10 words. That's all it's saying. Those who own the economic base of society, own the means of production, will influence everything else in society in order to legitimize the fact that they own it and that they are in control. That is what Marxist theory says. So when you bring it back to the media, what does that mean? Those who are rich and who own the means of production will also own media companies. And those media companies will produce stuff which is pumped out to the rest of us culturally, which has ideological content which legitimizes the fact that they own everything. It is a process of legitimization. And we, as people who own shit all, just nod and just like, yeah, there's haves and have-nots in society. Oh yeah, I don't hate people because they're rich. You know, I'm going to listen to that rich person because obviously they're rich. I'm going to be happy that we have a Prime Minister who's worth £750 million because like he's rich. I'm going to listen to that guy. He's not qualified to do this job, but I'm going to listen to him anyway because he's rich. Let's stop there for 5 minutes. I'm going to finish off this delicious beverage that I got for free out of a bucket outside.